With the EU elections fast approaching, I want to take a look at another batch of countries, particularly this time some in the South or Mediterranean region. Now, like I said in the last video, this will not be a deep dive into each country, but since there is, many countries involved in the EU elections across the continent of Europe, all with kind of different varying political climates, political parties and politicians and campaigns, I want to kind of give a general overview of most of the countries involved, most of the important ones, most notably France, which is outside of Germany, the second largest in terms of seats. And so this is going to be kind of a quick overview of what the polls are showing in each of these four countries. This is not going to be perfectly accurate to portray the actual situation. This is not going to be a deep dive into what the political issues are in those countries or what the backstory is. But of course, the focus of this channel will be mainly Germany, and I will do some other videos on the German European parliamentary elections as we get more polls. But as of now, I wanted to take a look kind of briefly at some of the other countries involved, and we will start with that today with these four. All right, the first country I want to look at is France. Now, France is very important. It is the second largest country in the EU. It has the second most amount of seats behind Germany at 81, where Germany has 96. Now, France is a very important country in the EU and will form a large bloc within the European Parliament. And if we take a look at the results, we can see that the right-wing Nationalist Populist Party, the National Rally of Marine Le Pen, is clearly ahead in first place at around 32%. Now, this party won both the 2014 and 2019 European elections in France, and so they are expected to win here again. However, instead of beating Macron's party by around 1 point, they are expected to beat them by around 16. This is 15 to 16 points ahead of the party in second place. So this will be a big victory for them, a big victory personally for Marine Le Pen. This could be a good signal for her going into the 2027 presidential elections if she decides to run. It's also a big victory for Jordan Bardella, who has become kind of the successor to Marine Le Pen in a way. He is the main candidate for the National Rally in these elections and is also the current chair of the party. Now, with him leading the National Rally, they are likely to become the largest of all the ID parties in Europe, and with that, they will have a claim to kind of run the party. Now, it doesn't mean just because you're the largest party in each of the European-wide political parties that you will be in charge of that grouping, but he does have the kind of claim to that. Before, there was potential that the AFD could compete with him, but the National Rally has surged from kind of 28% to 32%, and since the AFD has dropped, it's clear that the National Rally will be the largest ID party in Europe. Now, what's also interesting to note is the Reconquête party of Eric Zemmour and also Marion Maréchal Le Pen, the niece from Marine Le Pen, is also at around 6.5%. This would be enough for them to get some seats, not a large amount, but nonetheless, these two parties combined, the further right, the right of center bloc, excluding the center right, Les Républicains, is reaching almost 40%. This will be a record result for this bloc in modern French history. Now, Reconquête is arguably to the right of the National Rally on some issues, maybe not so to the right on others. It's kind of debatable which one is to the right of the other, but they kind of both sit in this right-wing populist, nationalist, anti-EU, anti-establishment sector, and most of the other parties have until now kind of refused to cooperate and work with them, but this would be a victory for the European right and especially the National Rally. By far, this would be their best nationwide result ever. Now, if we take a look at the results for Macron's party, the Ensemble, now this was, of course, formerly the Les Républicains En Marche, and then En Marche. The party has, of course, changed its name, rebranded. They've incorporated some other liberal parties and, created political alliance. But nonetheless, what we see here in this kind of dark blue color at 17%, this is the president of France, Emmanuel Macron's political grouping, political alliance. And them at 17%, I mean, this is an underperformance of what they got in 2019. This is definitely a bad result for them. And they are only getting around half of what the National Rally is. This is definitely a bad sign for whoever the successor is going to be, in 2027. This does not guarantee anything what's going to happen in the next presidential election, but nonetheless, it is an electoral test in a way, and this is not a good result for the Liberals, and this is not a good result for Macron. Of course, this is one of the largest liberal parties in Europe, and if they're taking a hit here, it means that the Renew Europe, the former alliance of liberal Democrats in Europe, is going to be taking a hit, Europe-wide. Now, if we take a look over here at the left, there's very interesting development, which is actually the traditional kind of socialist party, which is, they're called socialist. You can argue whether or not they're socialist or social democrat. It's the French Socialist Party. It is the main establishment center-left party that's operated and dominated French politics for much of its, post-World War II history. It's the party of Mitterrand, and they are actually at 13%. They are actually polling as the largest left-wing party. This is the inverse of what happened last time. The Greens were the largest in the last election. They have dropped some. And what's interesting to note is the party La France Insoumis, which is the Insubmissive France. It goes by different names, but it is a kind of left-wing populist party of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, a very far-left figure, a figure that's even considered to the left of the French Communist Party. And it appears that whenever Mélenchon is on the ballot, whenever he runs as a presidential candidate, this party does very well. They're able to get upwards of 20% of the vote. But when it's just the party running, they don't very perform the same amount. They do very poorly, around 8%. This is not a terrible result for them, but it's clear that without Mélenchon, they are not, being able to assert themselves as the dominant left-wing party. They were, in the legislative elections, the largest party. They kind of formed an alliance with the other left-wing parties called NUPES, and they were able to be the largest there. But it's clear that the socialists are kind of ahead in the polls. They are the main, left-wing, center-left party out of all of the various ones we see here. But nonetheless, there will be seats given to the LFI, the Socialist, and of course the Greens. But of course, if the Socialists are able to win some support back, this might be kind of a recovery from the disastrous presidential and legislative results they've suffered in recent times. So France definitely looking like a victory for the right, the nationalist, kind of further right in the European parliamentary grouping. And so we will take a look at the next country, which will be Italy. Now, in Italy, we actually have a very interesting situation, a development that's actually happened over the past several years, and that is the party of Matteo Salvini, Lega, which won an astounding 34-point victory, or 34% of the vote in the last election, in the last EU elections in 2019, has dropped dramatically. A catastrophic defeat is expected for them, and we see a lot of this vote has gone to Fratelli d'Italia, the party of Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Now, what has basically happened is that some of the issues have driven kind of the same right-wing voters from one party to the other. The Lega party was very strict, not strict, but they went along with some of the COVID lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, etc., and that angered a lot of their voters. They also kind of lost their momentum as being an anti-establishment party when they went into the government with some of the other parties during the COVID era, and this allowed Fratelli d'Italia to position themselves as a true opposition party, and a lot of voters shifted away from Lega to Fratelli. Now, this result, of course, is similar in line with what Fratelli d'Italia got in the general elections in Italy. This will be a victory for them. This will be a victory for the ECR, and what's important about this result is when we look at this and contrast it with Poland, we can see that this might actually determine who runs, or kind of the composition of the leadership within the ECR grouping. Now, the ECR was formerly dominated by the British Conservatives, by the Tory party, but since Brexit, they, of course, left. The UK is no longer a part of the European Union and therefore not part of the European Parliament. And because of that, the Polish Law and Justice Party has dominated the ECR grouping. But since they are expected to fall from around 45 to maybe 33%, and Fratelli d'Italia is surging to 26%, they are, of course, behind in the numbers, but Italy does have more people than Poland. It does have more seats, and so we could see that if maybe Law and Justice underperforms and if Fratelli d'Italia overperforms, we could see Fratelli very well be the largest ECR party and maybe kind of take over the reins from Poland in leading this grouping in the European Parliament. Now, when you look at Lega, of course, this is a disastrous defeat, and this is actually a contrast from the ID grouping in the rest of Europe. We see that in Austria, in Belgium, in Germany, in France, pretty much across Europe where the ID group is competing, they're doing very well. They are surging in the polls, getting their best results ever. But the reason why they're only doing around the same, or Europe-wide rather, why they're only going from 10.8 to 11%, is because Lega, which got 34% in the last election, in Italy, which is the third largest country in seats, is going to 8%. That is losing around 75% of their seats. This is a dramatic defeat for the party, and this is, going to be a defeat for the ID group, and they're going to make up for it in other countries. But nonetheless, this cannot be, underestimated. This is definitely going to be a hit for them and a defeat for Matteo Salvini. There was potential that he could become prime minister. Even that pretty much has gone out the window. But is it a defeat for the right, altogether? Not necessarily, because like I said, a lot of this vote is going to Fratelli d'Italia, which there's kind of debate over which of these two parties is more right wing. Fratelli is maybe on social issues somewhat more right wing. There's, they have kind of the similar position on hardline on immigration, hardline on the EU, but when it comes to foreign policy, most particularly Russia and Ukraine, the parties have some differences, but nonetheless, it is kind of a general victory for the Italian right altogether. The Socialist Party, the Democratic Party rather, is around 20%, with the five-star movement about 15%. These results aren't necessarily disastrous, but they're not going to be, necessarily satisfying for the leaders of the two. They are definitely competing against Meloni and the right wing bloc. I mean, this is a kind of moderate result for them. You know, the Democratic Party was able to get a large amount in 2014. You know, they're definitely nowhere near there. And the Five Star Movement was at a time the largest party in Italy back in the 2018 general elections. They lost some support, but they haven't totally ceased to exist on the political spectrum. And we see here there's some various kind of left wing and liberal parties that are going to probably get some seats. But the biggest development is the switch from the ECR to the ECR, Fratelli d'Italia, from the ID Lega, how that affects the balance of power within the European right and also the balance of power within each of those specific parties, because Lega will no longer be leading the ID group. They will be replaced by the National Rally, and Fratelli might replace the Law and Justice Party for the leadership of the ECR. Now, the next country, of course, is going to be Spain. Now, Spain has been expecting kind of a shift to the right for a long time now, a shift in power, rather. The current incumbent government of Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of the socialist and the more far-left Podemos party, and now what has kind of succeeded them at the Sumar party, they have been in power for a long time now, and it has been kind of expected that the conservatives and Vox and even the Ciudadanos party would be able to oust them. And there were elections back in 2023, there were elections back in around 2019 where you had a shift to the right, but they were not able to win enough seats to form a majority. And a lot of this had to do with the various nationalist or independence movements in Spain, most notably in Catalonia and the Basque region, which won enough seats, and they were kind of able to prevent both sides from having a workable majority. And so there was kind of an expectation for the right to take over. That has not happened yet, but they are very high in the polls. Now, the European parliamentary elections in 2019 was somewhat of a disappointment. The Vox party only got 6%, down from the 10% that they got in the general election. The People's Party, or the Popular Party, was only able to get 20%. And so this was definitely not a great result for them. But if we can see here in the polls, definitely something interesting has happened. Now, the People's Party, the conservative center-right established party, is surging up to around 40%, clearly ahead of the Workers' Party, the Socialist center-left party, and they are clearly, ahead of them by 12 points. Now, the Ciudadanos party, which was arguably to the left of the People's Party, a more liberal center-right party, maybe centrist, they have completely collapsed. I mean, they have collapsed years ago at some of the regional elections, and they've kind of ceased to exist on the Spanish political scene. They are probably not going to get a single seat. And Podemos was a left-wing counterpart to the Workers' Party. They are also struggling. A lot of their votes has gone to the newly formed Sumar party, but even them are, not at around the 10, 15, 20% that Podemos once was. It's clear, of course, that the two main parties are going to want to try and take away as much votes as they can from Podemos. If it was up to these two parties, they would have all the support. They're going to want, to present themselves as the dominant main, people's parties, the main competitors, the two-party system as we have in many countries. And, but nonetheless, they're most likely going to need allies to run in Spain. However, these results aren't going to, determine the Spanish parliament. It's going to be merely symbolic. But as we see here, the parties of the right, the People's Party and Vox, are nearing 50%. And so this kind of might be a symbol that finally this kind of shift in power to the right in Spain might actually be happening. But we have to wait and see for the results. But what's interesting to note about this election is if we take a look at the previous two, we see that in France, Italy, and Spain, the three, big Mediterranean kind of southwestern European countries, we have the three various right-wing parties in Europe winning the victory. In France, it's the Identity and Democracy group. In Italy, it's the European Conservative Reformists, the ECR. And in Spain, it's the EPP, the European People's Party. So we see a kind of very diverse, various interpretations of different right-wing ideologies kind of winning in different parts of this region. Now, this election result, of course, will be symbolic, but it's not going to be necessarily that meaningful. Spain isn't a huge, it is a large country. It's not as big as France, but this will kind of lead to what we can expect of the next Spanish general elections. But, of course, this result is not certain, and it seems to be kind of changing rapidly, so we'll have to wait and see what the results are. Now, the last country we want to look at is Greece. I initially wasn't going to cover Greece, but actually it is important when you look at, the Euro crisis that happened, and it is an interesting country. Now, the center-right party, the New Democracy of the current incumbent prime minister, is at around 33%. This is a victory for them. They are clearly ahead in first place, but this is around what they got in the last EU election, so not a total blowout landslide victory, but nonetheless a good result. Now, the most important development is that the the far left Syriza party, or the left-wing populist party of former Prime Minister Tsipras, has completely collapsed. Now, he came to the power in 2015 or sometime around then during the Euro crisis as this left-wing populist. It was seen as a victory for the European left. His party has since then collapsed since 2019, and they have fallen to 14%. They are still technically in second place, but this is down by far from what they got in the last election. This is definitely a defeat for the party. They are kind of hemorrhaging support over the last elections that Greece has had on every level: local elections, federal elections, or national elections, and in the EU, as we see here. Now, the center-left Social Democrats are at around 11%. This is a slight improvement over what they've got in the recent elections, but nonetheless, they haven't been able to kind of assert themselves as a mainstream competitor to the New Democracy Party. And the left here is very split, and this is part of the reason why New Democracy is going to be kind of in power probably for the time being and in a very powerful position. The Communist Party in Greece, which is a very traditional older party, they're around 8%. This is a moderate result for them. Now, what's important about Greece is you have this kind of rainbow, this kind of gradient of right-wing parties that are existing in the political spectrum. You have the kind of right-wing populist, national conservative Greek solutions, all the way to the extreme right, almost like fascist Golden Dawn party, which actually got seats in the last election, but they have been since banned for criminal activity, and some of the members of the party have gone to other political organizations and political parties. We have some more, far right nationalist Greek parties polling around 2-3%. It's unclear if any of these groups will get seats, as well as the other left-wing and liberal parties, but the main players, of course, are the New Democracy and Syriza, and we could see kind of a support rise from one of these various parties. But the ECR, the Greek Solutions, which is the main, right-wing populist, national conservative, not as far right as the other ones, is around 10%. This is a small improvement for them. So a kind of a victory for the incumbents, a kind of dissatisfactory result for the left, but not too many developments, but definitely an interesting result to look at. So, this is going to be it for this video. It might have lasted a bit longer than I expected or wanted it to, but these countries are definitely very important to look at when we come to the European parliamentary election results. I probably won't do any more videos on the polls for these countries, but I will look at the results for each of these countries when we get the results in June 9th for the EU elections. I hope everyone liked and enjoyed the video. If you do, please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you all for watching.